I spent 3 years photographing weddings for the man who destroyed mine. He never recognized me, the quiet photographer capturing his precious moments with bride after bride. But I recognized him instantly. He was the man who slept with my fiancée the night before our wedding. Now, after 36 weddings and 100,000 photos, it was finally time for him to see exactly what I'd been documenting all along. My name is Valerie Chen, and for the past 3 years I've been living a double life. To the wedding industry, I was simply Val, the sought-after photographer known for capturing raw emotion and authentic moments. But beneath my professional exterior was a woman methodically executing the most patient revenge plan ever devised. It all started with what should have been the happiest weekend of my life. After dating Michael for 5 years, our dream wedding was finally happening. We'd saved every penny, planned every detail, and invited 150 of our closest friends and family to celebrate with us at an elegant vineyard estate. The rehearsal dinner was perfect. Toasts that made everyone laugh and cry, our families bonding over shared stories, and Michael looking at me like I was the only woman in the world. That night, following tradition, we slept separately. Michael stayed with his groomsmen at a nearby hotel while I remained at the vineyard with my bridesmaids. "One more sleep until forever," he texted me before bed. I woke the next morning to my phone ringing incessantly. It was Jessica, my maid of honor, her voice cracking as she spoke. "Val, you need to sit down." "What's wrong? Is everything okay with the flowers? The cake?" "It's Michael." My stomach dropped. "Is he hurt? Was there an accident?" "No, She hesitated. "He's gone, Val. He left a note for you with the wedding planner." The world stopped spinning. Michael's handwritten note was brief and devastating. "I can't do this. I made a mistake last night. I'm so sorry." Details emerged throughout that horrible day as I sat in my wedding dress, unable to change, unable to process what was happening. Michael had slept with one of the wedding guests, Adrian, a colleague he'd always insisted was just a friend. They had disappeared together, leaving me to face 150 guests with the news that there would be no wedding. My parents handled everything, informing the guests, dealing with vendors, fielding concerned calls. I remained frozen, trapped between disbelief and devastating clarity. Every late meeting and work emergency suddenly made perfect sense. After the initial shock came the humiliation. Returning wedding gifts. Canceling the honeymoon. Fielding pitying looks at work. My entire life had been upended in a single night, and the financial hit was almost as painful as the emotional one. Deposits lost, vendors paid, a honeymoon that couldn't be refunded. 3 months of depression followed. I barely left my apartment, took a leave of absence from work, and disconnected from social media to avoid the inevitable gossip. Then one morning I saw them, Michael and Adrian, in a coffee shop, laughing like nothing had happened. He had completely moved on while I was still drowning. Something shifted inside me that day. I realized I had 2 choices: remain broken or transform my pain into purpose. I chose the latter. Photography had always been my passion, though I'd only pursued it as a hobby while working in marketing. During my recovery, I had immersed myself in it as therapy, capturing raw emotions of strangers in public spaces. Looking through those images, I realized I had an eye for authentic moments, especially painful ones. Within a month, I'd built a portfolio and created a new identity: Val Chen, wedding photographer. I changed my appearance just enough, cutting my long black hair into a stylish bob, adopting glasses instead of contacts, and cultivating a quiet, professional demeanor that made me nearly invisible at events. The wedding industry in our city was surprisingly small. Everyone knew everyone, which made it easy to track Michael's new career as a wedding planner once I established myself. He had always been charming and detail-oriented, so his quick success wasn't surprising. What was surprising was how easily I managed to get myself onto his recommended vendor list. "Your work is extraordinary," he told me during our first professional meeting, showing no sign of recognition. "You capture something most photographers miss." "I pay attention to details others ignore," I replied, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. And so began my 3-year journey photographing weddings that Michael planned. 36 weddings to be exact. Each one perfect, each one documented with meticulous care, and each one containing subtle evidence of his ongoing affairs with various brides, bridesmaids, and wedding guests. Michael had a type and a pattern. He was drawn to vulnerable women, especially nervous brides having pre-wedding jitters. He would comfort them with his understanding smile and calming presence, slowly establishing inappropriate intimacy. As their wedding photographer, I captured it all: the lingering touches, the secretive glances, the empty rooms they both disappeared from during receptions. The first time I witnessed him working his charm on a bride, I nearly broke my cover. It was at the Henderson wedding, just my 3rd event with him. I watched through my viewfinder as he comforted the bride in a private moment, his hand lingering too long on her bare shoulder, his body leaning in too close as he whispered something that made her nervous expression melt into grateful relief. My finger froze on the shutter button. It was happening again, the same routine he had undoubtedly used with Adrian, the same calculated intimacy masked as professional concern. But instead of confronting him, I did something far more powerful. I documented it. Every touch, every private conversation, every disappearance into empty rooms during the reception. By the end of the night, I had a collection of images that told a story no one else could see, yet. "You got some amazing shots," Michael said as we were packing up that night. "The Hendersons will be thrilled." "I always make sure to capture the real story," I replied with a smile he couldn't possibly understand. The Hendersons received their beautiful wedding album, carefully edited to show only the perfect moments of their special day. But in my private collection, a different narrative was taking shape, one that would eventually become Michael's undoing. As months passed and my reputation grew, I refined my technique. I learned to be completely invisible, a ghost capturing moments no one realized were being preserved. I developed a system of hidden cameras I could place in strategic locations at venues. I befriended wedding venue staff who would text me when they noticed Michael disappearing with someone. Through it all, I maintained a strictly professional relationship with him. I never flirted, never showed any personal interest, and never gave him reason to look at me too closely. I was simply Val, the reliable photographer who always delivered exceptional work and never caused drama. "You're the only vendor I never have to worry about," he told me once, clapping me on the shoulder after a particularly challenging wedding. "You're like a ninja, you see everything but nobody sees you." If only he knew how accurate that assessment was. By the end of the first year, I had documented Michael's inappropriate behavior with 8 different brides or bridesmaids. By the second year, that number had grown to 19. Some were just flirtations, boundary violations that remained in the realm of professional misconduct. Others were clear affairs, documented through my lens with unambiguous clarity. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was studying his methodology, understanding his psychology. Michael didn't pursue these women because of physical attraction alone. He was addicted to the power dynamic, to being the calm, reassuring presence during their most vulnerable moments. He positioned himself as the one person who truly understood their anxieties, then leveraged that trust for his own gratification. It was calculated. It was predatory. And it was exactly what he had done to me 5 years earlier when I was stressed about our wedding plans and he had been my rock, or so I believed. Throughout this time, I lived a compartmentalized life. Monday through Thursday, I edited photos, met with new clients, and built my business legitimately. My work truly was exceptional. I was nominated for industry awards and featured in wedding magazines. On weekends, I photographed celebrations of love while documenting their corruption. The duality took its toll. Some nights, I would come home from weddings and cry for hours, the weight of witnessing so many women being manipulated overwhelming me. Other nights, I would meticulously organize my evidence, the growing archive giving me strength to continue. "Are you dating anyone?" my mother would ask during our weekly calls. "I'm focused on my career right now," I would always answer, unable to explain that I was locked in a years-long dance with the man who had broken me. In my darker moments, I questioned my plan. Was I wasting my life on revenge? Had I become as calculating as Michael, just in a different way? Then I would receive messages from newlyweds, thanking me for capturing the pure joy of their wedding day, and the bitter irony would renew my resolve. By the third year, Michael had risen to become the city's premier wedding planner, with a waiting list of eager clients and features in national publications. His success was built on his reputation for creating emotionally authentic celebrations, a phrase that made me physically ill when I read it in a glossy magazine profile. Then came the announcement I had been waiting for. Michael and Adrian were engaged. Through 3 years together, they were planning their own celebration, described in a fawning social media post as the culmination of a love story for the ages. I knew this was the endgame. Every image I had collected, every pattern I had documented, had been leading to this moment. When Michael's assistant called to ask if I was available to photograph their wedding, I accepted with a professional enthusiasm that gave nothing away. "Michael specifically requested you," she explained. "He says no one else captures the emotional truth of relationships like you do." The irony was almost poetic. In the months leading to their wedding, I photographed their engagement party, their shower, their rehearsal dinner. I became Adrienne's confidant, listening to her worries about Michael's long work hours and frequent late-night meetings with clients. "It's normal in this industry," I assured her, capturing her uncertain expressions. "Wedding planning is very intimate work." What I didn't tell her was that I had photographic evidence of Michael kissing a bridesmaid in the coat closet during the Abbott wedding just 2 weeks earlier. Or that I had documented him slipping into a hotel room with a nervous bride the night before her wedding during the planning of the Richardson celebration. The night before Michael and Adrienne's wedding, exactly 3 years and 1 day after Michael had abandoned me at the altar, I sat in my apartment reviewing my complete collection. The evidence was organized into 3 separate hard drives. The first contained standard wedding photos any photographer would deliver, beautiful, professional, meticulously edited images that would make any couple happy. The second held what I called the pattern, a carefully curated montage of images from all 36 weddings showing Michael's identical seduction techniques with different women. The footage was arranged chronologically and set to the love song that was supposed to have been our first dance. The third contained the most damning evidence, clear images of Michael kissing or disappearing into private spaces with 8 different brides or bridesmaids, including time-stamped photos from hotel security cameras I had bribed to obtain. As I finished my preparations, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Can't wait for you to work your magic tomorrow. This one's personal." I replied simply, "I always capture the real story." The morning of Michael and Adrienne's wedding dawned with perfect weather, sunny with a gentle breeze, just like the day I was supposed to marry him. I arrived early, professional as always, my camera bag containing not just equipment but the culmination of 3 years of patience. Adrienne was radiant in her dressing room, surrounded by bridesmaids and family. I photographed her nervous excitement, her tender moments with her mother, the champagne toast with her sisters. Through my lens, I gave her the beautiful memories every bride deserves, regardless of whom she was marrying. "I'm so glad you're here, Val," she said as I adjusted her veil. "You've become such a friend through all this." For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Adrienne wasn't my enemy. She had been manipulated by Michael just as I had been, just as countless others had been. But then I remembered finding them in that coffee shop 3 years ago, laughing while I was still shattered. I remembered the note he left me on our wedding day. I remembered every bride whose special day had been tainted by his predatory behavior. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about all of them. Michael was in his element in the groom's suite, joking with his groomsmen as they prepared for the ceremony. Through my camera, I documented his practiced charm, his confident smile, his complete lack of awareness that this day would end very differently than he imagined. The photographer from my nightmares, he joked when he saw me, a comment that sent chills down my spine with its inadvertent accuracy. "Always catching me when I least expect it." "It's my specialty," I replied, snapping a photo of his smiling face that would contrast powerfully with his expression later. The ceremony was beautiful. My camera caught every vow, every promise of fidelity and honesty that Michael spoke with practiced sincerity. During the reception, I photographed their first dance, the cake cutting, the toasts celebrating their perfect love story. Then, as planned, I approached the wedding coordinator, Michael's assistant, who had no idea about our history. "I have a special presentation ready for the video screen during the final toast," I said. "The couple approved it weeks ago as a surprise for the guests." She nodded enthusiastically, connecting my laptop to the venue's projection system. Right on cue, the best man called for everyone's attention for a final toast to the happy couple. "Before we close this perfect evening," he said, "we have a special video presentation from their talented photographer, who has worked with Michael on countless beautiful weddings." The lights dimmed. The screen illuminated. And the pattern began to play. First, guests smiled at what appeared to be a professional montage of Michael's career highlights. Then confusion spread as the pattern became clear. Michael using identical lines, identical moves, identical strategies with woman after woman. The music, our cancelled first dance song, played softly as years of predatory behavior unfolded in high resolution. Michael's face drained of color. He stood frozen, champagne glass in hand, as his professional and personal life imploded simultaneously. Adrienne's expression shifted from confusion to horror to rage as the evidence mounted. When the final image appeared, Michael kissing a bridesmaid in the very venue they were now standing in, timestamped just yesterday during their rehearsal, Adrienne threw her champagne in his face and walked out. As chaos erupted, I calmly packed my equipment. Michael finally recognized me as I headed for the exit. "You," he whispered, his voice a mixture of rage and fear. "It was you all along." I smiled, taking one final picture of his devastated face. "I always told you I capture the moments others miss." The fallout was spectacular and far-reaching. The video was recorded by multiple guests on their phones, and despite attempts to contain it, clips began circulating in wedding industry circles by morning. Different brides came forward with stories once the initial video leaked online, each one validating the pattern I had documented. Michael's business collapsed overnight. Wedding venues removed him from their preferred vendor lists. Clients canceled contracts. Industry publications that had once featured him now wrote exposés on predatory behavior in the wedding industry. Adrienne filed for annulment the following week, citing fraud and misrepresentation. The legal proceedings revealed even more about Michael's character, including financial improprieties within his business and a history of harassment complaints that had been quietly settled. As for me, I expected my career to suffer collateral damage. I had, after all, violated the sacred trust between photographer and client. But something unexpected happened instead. I received a flood of new booking requests. Turns out people appreciate a photographer who notices everything and has an unflinching commitment to exposing the truth. 3 months after Michael's wedding, I received an email from a woman named Teresa, a bride from the Patterson wedding I had photographed 18 months earlier. "I saw the video," she wrote. "I need to know, did you have images of Michael and me too?" I had, in fact, documented Michael's inappropriate behavior with Teresa during her wedding planning, though it hadn't appeared in the final montage I showed at his wedding. I invited her to my studio to talk in person. "He made me feel like I was crazy," she explained, tears streaming down her face as she sat across from me. "Like I had imagined everything or somehow encouraged him. My husband never knew, I was too ashamed to tell him." I showed her the images I had captured, nothing explicit but clear evidence of Michael's boundary violations and manipulation techniques. As she looked at them, her expression transformed from shame to validation to anger. "I needed to see this," she said finally. "I needed to know I wasn't crazy." That conversation changed the direction of my work. I created a private support group for women who had been manipulated by wedding industry professionals, providing a space for them to share their experiences and heal. I developed a workshop on recognizing predatory behavior in celebration environments, which I now present at industry conferences. My photography business evolved into a specialty niche, documenting divorce parties and fresh start celebrations for women leaving toxic relationships. These events, sometimes solemn, sometimes joyful, always cathartic, became my focus, and the raw emotion I captured earned me a reputation as a photographer who told the complete truth, not just the pretty parts. A year after Michael's wedding, Adrienne reached out. She wanted to meet to talk about what had happened. We sat in a quiet corner of a cafe, two women connected by the same man's betrayal. "I should hate you for how you exposed him," she said, studying my face. "But I'm grateful. You saved me from years of lies." "I didn't do it just for revenge," I admitted. "Though that was part of it at first. I did it because I saw a pattern that would never stop without intervention." She nodded slowly. "You know what's ironic? He talked about you all the time, Val, his amazing photographer. He said you saw things no one else noticed." She laughed bitterly. He had no idea how right he was. As our conversation continued, I found myself letting go of the last fragments of resentment I held toward her. Adrienne hadn't been my enemy. She had been just another woman caught in Michael's web, albeit one whose presence had initially devastated me. "What will you do now?" I asked her. "I'm training to become a counselor," she said, specializing in helping people recognize manipulation in relationships. My own experience gave me unique insight. We parted with an unexpected sense of connection, not friends exactly, but allies in the aftermath of the same storm. 2 years after Michael's wedding, I received a formal inquiry from a psychological research team studying patterns of predatory behavior in celebratory environments. They wanted to use my documentation methods as a case study in identifying systematic manipulation. I agreed, on the condition that all subjects remained anonymous and that the research would be used to develop prevention protocols. Today, when I walk into a wedding venue with my camera, I still see everything: the genuine joy, the nervous anticipation, the authentic connections. But I also notice the red flags, the boundary violations, the moments when celebration becomes cover for manipulation. The difference is that now I have protocols in place for addressing concerns directly rather than collecting them for future exposure. Sometimes people ask if 3 years was excessive for revenge. I tell them it wasn't revenge I was after, it was justice. Not just for me, but for every woman Michael would have hurt in the future. Last month, I photographed my first wedding since that night, my own. David, unlike Michael, understands boundaries, respects vulnerability, and values authenticity above appearance. When he proposed, he asked a simple question: "Who should photograph our wedding?" "I've been thinking about that," I told him with a smile. "I know exactly the right person." My assistant captured beautiful images of our celebration, a small, intimate gathering of people who truly supported us. The photos showed genuine joy, honest emotion, real connection. There are no hidden meanings, no secret agendas, no moments that wouldn't bear scrutiny. The most valuable thing I learned through my journey wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about patience revealing truth. Through my lens, I didn't just capture Michael's betrayal. I exposed a pattern that would have continued indefinitely, harming countless women in its wake. They say living well is the best revenge. I disagree. The best revenge is making sure your story prevents others from experiencing the same pain. Every wedding I photograph now comes with my promise. I see everything, and the truth always deserves the perfect exposure.